welcome to you, Stella. And just very quickly, how has the pandemic affected your organisation?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for that. Look, we're seeing a tale of two cohorts. One is, I guess, the vulnerable cohort we have been working with over many years now, and particularly within that group, migrant students and refugees really suffering and attending services where we really can only offer them emergency relief. Family violence services have remained a steady, and I don't like saying this, just a steady growth in family violence, and some slightly different things that have happened. And of course, you know what I'll be talking about a little bit more later, it's just a whole new cohort of Australians, thousands and thousands of them actually, that we've never worked with before, that are now at our doorstep, and we're hoping that they don't become a tsunami in years to come.
Oh, thank you. And we'll look forward to hearing from you shortly, Stella. Sarah Pennell, the General Manager of Business for Foodbank Australia. Sarah has a long career in the food industry and supporting and promoting farmers and their products, and has fulfilled a variety of roles at Foodbank, and now responsible for business, finance, governance, and oversees the research portfolio, which includes the annual and very recent publication of the Foodbank Hunger Report. Sarah, the pandemic clearly affecting your organisation, and what's exciting you about the potential of what we're discussing today to help address your concerns?
Okay, sorry about that, I was on mute. I think I can only echo what Stella has said. We're seeing more people seeking food relief than ever before. But I do believe there is an opportunity here, because people are aware of and understanding the issue of food insecurity better than ever before. Right. So I think there's an opportunity for us to reframe the issue of food security or insecurity, and perhaps get, some action in a way that wasn't possible before this pandemic. Well, before the drought, the bushfires, and now the pandemic.
It's very biblical. Thank you, Sarah. Tony Wren, the Executive Director of Anti-Poverty Week, couldn't be more topical to be conducting this meeting today. Tony, you've worked in economic and social policy for more than 30 years in Australia, Japan, and the US and the UK. Now, as Executive Director of Anti-Poverty Week, trying to reframe, I suppose, how we talk about poverty in Australia and focus on evidence-based solutions to take collectively to action that. How are you finding this pandemic, and what is exciting you about the potential of sort of this data-driven model that we're discussing today to assist you with the challenges ahead?
Thanks very much. And I just want to say I'm here on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to all. Yeah, I think the most fascinating thing that happened this year, amongst all the gloom and it's not ended yet, we actually had a massive reduction in poverty in Australia, even with this pandemic, because the government actually stepped up for a number of people. We know at least 2.3 million of them who got an increased payment. And that's the unemployment payment, but also other payments associated. And last year in Anti-Poverty Week, we looked at the evidence, and it was clear the single best thing that could be done to reduce poverty was an increase. And then it happened after 25 years. And after everyone saying, business groups, not just our groups, but everyone saying it's way too low, we can't keep this payment this low, it changed. And we did see a reduction for the people who were able to get it. And of course, there's a lot of people who were left out.
Okay.
So in the midst of this, we've proven that we can protect people from poverty, and we've seen the positive impact for many people who'd been living on payments for a long time, able to actually feed themselves, able to actually look after their kids. So I want to have a hopeful message that what we've learned also of coming together and looking after people, we saw a lot of that at the beginning, and governments looking at evidence to make decisions. I hope that we can take that message forward. And again, I'm very excited about this evidence. We need the evidence. There's a lot to do and always not enough resources. So if we can direct it to where we need it most, that will be fantastic.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Mohammed Al-Kafaji, the CEO of the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils of Australia. Mohammed has a demonstrated history of working in the non-profit sector and is passionate about solving social issues through partnerships, and believes cultural diversity makes us richer as a society, and keen to ensure that the voice of new and emerging communities are heard and represented even in this difficult time. Welcome, Mohammed. How have you found the pandemic affecting your areas?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for everyone for organising this fantastic webinar. Look, I guess for multicultural Australians or culturally and linguistically diverse Australians, what we've seen is that this pandemic has really shown the fault lines and the fragility of, I guess, government services and the safety net for a lot of people in that cohort. I mean, not every cold Australian is on permanent residency or has Australian citizenship. So we've seen that many people were left out of JobKeeper and JobSeeker, and they really struggle to kind of make ends meet. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I think it's been actually an opportunity for an organisation like FECA to advocate for our communities and to actually have a decent dialogue with different government departments to say, look, we've been saying this for a long time. We don't have data because data is an issue, but we've seen the devastating impacts of the pandemic on cold communities, especially in Victoria.
Yes. Thank you, Mohammed. Now, I'd like to kick things off, and thank you very much for that with our facilitator for today, the person who's put it together, which is Scott McLaughlin, from the founder of the Art of More and also the More Collective. And Scott is someone I've known for some time, 1.5, maybe 2 decades. We went to school together. No, Scott is a well-known leader of change and working with people of purpose, which does set him apart. He has an expertise in maximising data-driven insights, driving growth and transformation, and decades of experience across research, insight, strategy, commercial channels, partnerships, ASX top 50, as well as SMEs and pretty well anyone. And having known Scott for so long, he brings to all his work a passion and commitment which you will struggle to find anyone who throws himself in to try and help people and solve problems as he does. So Scott, would you like to introduce us to the Vulnerable Australia model?
Sure. I think I want to start out by just firstly thanking the incredible team that we put around us to get this done. I mean, it's just been a very big challenge, and we cannot understate nor underrepresent the inherent complexities of vulnerability, both in its definition and in its measurement. So look, today I aim to provide some top-line insights and explain the approach we've taken to uncover the facts and realities of vulnerability, and in the hope that it will assist social services deployment going forward. So what we did is we set out to build a model that leveraged insights from multiple data sources so that we could accurately determine the key leading indicators for vulnerability in Australia, so that we might be better equipped to anticipate vulnerability in communities. And so what we have built is an evidence-based empirical model as a foundation for an adaptive intelligence system, which is a fair bit to take on. So I can say that again, an evidence-based empirical model as a foundation for for an adaptive intelligence system, and I'll explain that in a couple of slides, designed to work alongside social services to better anticipate and service the rapid changes in demand for services across Australia. We hope this model will help to both identify true and be a constant measure of vulnerability. We hope it identifies vulnerability where it's likely, where it's not yet presented, to better inform resource management, responsiveness, and funding requirements. We also hope to support the social services sector in preemptively reaching into those people and actively support them earlier in their journey, potentially reducing suffering through early intervention, particularly with the newly vulnerable who have limited experiences with engaging social services. So to the model itself and how it's built, what we've actually built. Look, the process of building this was to amalgamate as many relevant data sources as we could. And we wanted to make sure our intelligence was well informed and timely, so that it was always updatable and up to date based on what's happening in the environment. In an environment like this, as a moving target, we have to make sure that the finger is on the pulse. And that's probably the biggest insight and takeaway that I want you to take from today, really. So what we've done is we've created a data lake of 68 data sources at the moment. There might be more to come, but at this stage it has 68 data sources in it, and we've subsequently modelled that data as a foundation to accommodate social services supply data, which I'll talk to a little later. This is an effort to ensure that that adaptive intelligence system I described is delivered, is fact-based and data-driven, is dynamic and in its updates, and up to date, and is designed to align to the deployment of social services, in changing demand. So that's the idea of the model. Look, the way our team looked at vulnerability is through three core lenses, I suppose. With socioeconomic vulnerability centered around families and household financial structures, community economic vulnerability, which is around vulnerabilities such as dependencies on industry, and then environmental vulnerabilities. So where we see sort of areas of bushfire and potential bushfire areas going forward. The important thing about these three lenses is that they're not mutually exclusive. They can all occur at once. And of course that would be the worst case scenario, but that's the lenses through which we looked at it. What we've seen in the data and what it implies or infers is that vulnerability is a continuum. It's subject to continuous change. There's many things we don't know yet about government intervention, about what will happen in the employment sector, what will happen to small business, what will happen to those people who are singly reliant on industries succeeding. So we don't know those things. So we know that we have to stay on this. It's not exclusive to one element or variable though, and that's the important bit I want to take away. You cannot look at a job seeker uptake and assume that you understand what's happening for that person or that household. It's really complicated, right? And so the variables are interdependent that we've used, and they will always be fused together to make sense of what's happening for people. See, this is on the back of the bushfires. In our community, we've been impacted to varying degrees, and we've seen lots of stuff where lots of traditionally vulnerable people certainly being continuously and at number impacted by the pandemic. But we've also seen a very new vulnerable set of communities come about due to the rapid changes in the economic impact that's happening with this pandemic. And of course, this is off the back of bushfires, and I know Sarah Pennell could talk to, and in fact is a good quantitative measure of how harrowing that was. So we now see that there's a whole bunch of reasons why we have to be more responsive to what's happening. You see the charts that you're looking at right now, what they're reflecting is the recipients of DSS payments of job seeker and youth allowance between December 2019 and August 2020. And you can see just visually what that variance is and where that is new vulnerable are emerging geographically. What was really interesting though about these 2 points in time between December 2019 and August 2020 is that statistically speaking, 63% of job seeker youth allowance recipients could be predicted by socioeconomics in December 2019. By May 2020, only 2% of job seeker and youth allowance recipients could be predicted by the same set of variables. So What we've seen is we've seen areas such as Geelong in Victoria, Richmond in Sydney suffer high impacts to already relatively high base of vulnerability, but we've also seen new areas like Cronulla and Baulkham Hills in Sydney, Stonington in Melbourne, with up to 1,100% increases in job seeker recipients in those communities. And it's not the percentages that are big. The actual quantums of these people are also at number. So that's something we want to take away about the constants of change here. In terms of what we believe, and the reason we set out to do this work in the first place, is that we fundamentally believe that vulnerability can be anticipated. And I'm not sure that slide's kicking in, is it? For today's purposes, we really looked at vulnerability through 4 key pressure points. So we have 3 lenses that coexist in 4 key pressure points. Now that's just for today's purposes. There may be many other pressure points that need to be explored depending upon what social service we're trying to provide and in what area. So what these pressure points are really basically the impact of unemployment, the impact of financial stress at a household level, the impact of changing requirements of health services in various communities, and the impact of community dependencies such as industry reliance or industry dependencies at a local level. When you fuse these elements together though, what we've identified so far, and I'm going to continue to reiterate so far, is that 487,000 Australians are at medium to high risk of vulnerability as we see it right now. Additionally, in our calculations, we've estimated that there's about 2.5 million Australians who live in communities with high industry dependency, which is to talk to the potential for vulnerability going forward. We've already seen the impact on tourism from this pandemic, with tourism areas commonly with 1.5 to 3.5 times increases in job seeker and youth allowance uptake. Areas like the Whitsundays, Sunshine Coast, Byron Bay in New South Wales, Phillip Island and Lorne in Victoria. This of course has been somewhat attributed to Melburnian money being ring-fenced during this time. But additional to that, and something that's also, that we really wanted to highlight today, is there's communities that are also dependent on other industries such as the construction industry. And it's another area that's beginning to reveal some significant impacts in specific communities of concern. And we'd highlight sort of areas like Alexander Hills in Queensland or Tea Gully in South Australia, where 1/3 of those households are singularly dependent on the construction industry. In fact, we've already seen communities like the Yarra and Macedon Ranges, suburbs of the Gold Coast, with up to 6 times increases based on dependencies on the construction industry, areas like Robina, Oxenford and Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast. And of course, we hope that this summer is a time of recovery and not one where we face additional negative environmental events.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Very, very sobering. And Sarah, if you could provide us with your thoughts around how on earth are we going to be assisting people this level of vulnerability when there are 500,000 people moving into that vulnerable level? Is that what's happening with Food Bank? Are you seeing these sorts of things flowing through into your service requests already?
We certainly have, yes. So we launched our Food Bank Hunger Report on Monday. And one of the top findings there that we highlighted is the fact that we are seeing a dramatic increase in demand for food relief. So it's up 47% on average since March this year. I think, Scott's spoken about a number of different indicators of vulnerability. Of course, one of the most outwardly obvious ones is food security. So, an indication of a person's situation is their ability to put food on the table for themselves and their family. We think of it as food insecurity being the canary in the coal mine. Not that you need a canary right at the moment, but in normal times, it's one of the key ways of knowing what a person's circumstances are when they present for food relief. there's a wide variety of causes for food insecurity, of course, but it's accepted that financial hardship is the most important underlying determinant. I think we can all understand the fact that when it comes to keeping a roof over your head or getting vital medical care, as was shown in the video at the beginning of this session, you know, food becomes a discretionary item. And you just have to buy the cheapest calories you can with your grocery money, or eke out a meager pantry, or skip meals altogether. And of course, we're seeing that play out now. What we're learning, I think, from recent events is how easily food security can be threatened. And I think that's going to be a game changer in the kind of social policy space. A few years ago, we did a survey that revealed about 3/4 of Australians didn't believe there was a hunger problem in Australia. And there was a lot of judgment related to the issue of food insecurity. You know, the prevailing attitude was that it's likely that it's the individual's own fault, was the way it was perceived. At the time, the top issue for the public was cost of living and debt. You know, in a nutshell, people were concerned about living above their means, but those two things were not put together in people's minds: food insecurity and you know, financial precariousness. I think we can say that, you know, fast forward to 2020, we've had COVID on top of Black Summer, on top of, you know, a terrible drought. These things have created a perfect storm, and for many, the things they feared back then about, you know, the cost of living and ability to take care of their families has come to pass.
Yes.
You know, if not for themselves, then certainly for someone they know.
Yeah.
And, you know, our hunger report on Monday showed that the hardest hit are, you know, young people, and women are being harder hit than men. And the really key stat is that 3 out of 10 of those currently experiencing food insecurity had never gone hungry before the pandemic. So a whole new cohort are coming to understand, you know, how the precarious nature of our well-being.
Very, very concerning,
yeah.
Sarah. Thank you very much. I'm just conscious of time, and there's so many points to make about this. I'm still sort of digesting the 3 in 10, which is sort of almost impossible.
And I think I can say, Mark, we at Foodbank don't believe we've reached peak hunger yet. This has a long way to play out, and it's going to be that economic, quote, recovery period, unquote, where we're going to see the biggest impacts on the public.
Well, thank you. And Sarah from Good Shepherd, I'm assuming you don't have good news for us as well. Is this playing out in your areas as well?
I think that's for you, Stella.
Yeah,
Stella,
yeah, it's S. I got he's close. Look, I think just to follow up on Sarah's comments, we were in a fortunate position where the federal government acted early at the beginning of the year to provide funding for us to respond with a national financial conversation and no interest loan service, and we've done that. It's been up and running for the last 3 months. We've had about 10,000 conversations to date. And just to give you a snapshot of this new emerging cohort, if I was giving you a summary of who we're working with this time last year, I would have given you figures of Centrelink recipients of being in the order of 85 to 95% of the people who are receiving our services. In the phone conversations that we're having, only 42% of people who are asking for help are on Centrelink. So to Tony's point earlier as well, you know, the JobKeeper and package of benefits that have gone out to the most vulnerable we are usually working with have done their job, and thank God, because we've got a tsunami of all this new cohort that has hit us. 60% of the people that we've been speaking with are women, and we know young people and women in particular are the hardest hit and the slowest to return back to any strong economic participation position. It really is also a story of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I guess in order of causes, presenting issues and causes in the financial stress, about 34% are presenting, stating that they are in arrears in relation to their housing situation in rent and mortgage. Utility debt is at 29%. One of the most concerning things we're seeing is a 12% of people are talking about personal loans that they cannot now repay. And within that, it's a mixture of payday lending, fast, small credit loans, and a really scary number and growing number of afterpay debt that is emerging. And we've never seen anything like that before. And a whole new cohort and a new generation of people that don't really appreciate how easy it is to become, in high debt situation and scary debt. So there's a lot of work around that. Only 70% of people are reporting that they could meet an emergency cost of $2,000. And in fact, within that, only 7% felt absolutely confident that they could. So there's this whole cohort who've never gone to welfare before. Part of their struggle is the confidence and competence they have in navigating services and support for themselves and knowing where to go and what it all means. So there's been a lot of conversation just in assisting people to navigate and dealing with the shame and stigma they feel about asking for help. We've had scenarios of young people who are incurring afterpay debt. You know, one young person lived a block away from emergency relief place. He could have gotten free lunches and dinner, and instead was using Afterpay to get food delivered to his home, even though he couldn't afford it and he knew he couldn't afford it. Most of people, in fact, are between the ages of 19 and 44. And if we actually cross-check that with the amount of the Australians who we know already cleaned out their super, there's about 460,000 Australians who have cleaned out their super who are under the ages of 35.
That is absolutely frightening, because it gives us this extremely long tail now coming out of this. You know, this is not something with a quick fix now. It is very long term. So Scott, can I just ask you to comment on those observations that we've just heard? Do you have any data around this?
I just might, Mark. Yes. I think.
How fortuitous, Scott.
Yes, indeed. What we're showing here in this particular map is, you know, just one area of Australia, obviously, and we want to talk to the reliance on government stimulus. I mean, I don't believe there's been a time before now where we've had this much government stimulus and such a wide range of people relying on government support. And the likely vulnerability that we have, the government stimulus is changing though. So, you know, as per the recent budget. So it's helping some and it's not helping others. It's like non-permanent residents or women, you could argue. This view of the model highlights where high proportions of people are on JobSeeker and also face significant financial pressures in terms of their housing costs relative to their household income. So this is one fusion point of a few data sets that starts to make more sense of the extent of the pressure that people are under and their likelihood for vulnerability. The map shows an example areas of northern New South Wales and the Gold Coast as example of this combination of pressure points and under threat. And interestingly, the Gold Coast, which has seen a population rise due to relocations and so forth as well to reduce cost of living. So there's a lot happening in that part of the world. I can attest to, my parents live up on the border, in fact. So, but the other thing we wanted to talk to is engagement. And I'm certainly aware that many young people have been presenting to social services, and we felt it was really necessary to point out that from our experience, to add another layer of insight, we understand that communities often present differences in the way they think about and approach life, to Stella's point, in terms of how they want to engage the sector. And I certainly know that Foodbank can experience this. For the sector, the insight is understanding how services will need to behave and engage in order to effectively serve the varying perspectives across different vulnerable communities. We thought as an example of this, we'd have a look at the 18 to 24-year-old young people who are currently experiencing, by our estimation, or are in communities that are experiencing vulnerability. We can see them across their views and their variations of views about how they would like to engage. There's definitely differences in between the states, and I won't read out all those examples, but we just wanted to give you a top line example of how those young people might prefer to be engaged or prefer to be spoken about with respect to the engagement of social services. And of course, this changes again when we look at more granular levels, certainly around ethnic, culturally and linguistically diverse communities and so forth. So, but basically this means to effectively engage and support these young people, we need to consider what are the right approaches and messages that will help them at this time to be comfortable in reaching out and accepting the support that they equally deserve and would benefit from. So is the reason to show that insight.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Scott. Now, Tony from Anti-Poverty Week, I have a question for you. Why just 1 week? Surely this is your chance for Anti-Poverty Year.
Yeah, well, actually this year we've been very active since March, doing as much analysis as we could, and also to really point to the needs. There were some groups we felt that weren't getting listened to. So some of the analysis we did was to find out, okay, we had 800,000 people already unemployed at the start, and we knew there were about 300,000 children in those families. So we wanted to know, with this doubling of people who are unemployed and the people who are getting the coronavirus supplement, how many children are in families? Because we're very concerned about child poverty. We know that if children grow up in poverty, that can have a scarring effect right through their lives. And it's not right. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We already had 1 in 6 children growing up in poverty before the bushfires and the pandemic. So we wanted to see what was happening. Data isn't easy to get, but we were able to get it. And we estimated there were at least 1 million children. That's 1 in 5 of all Australian children had a parent receiving the coronavirus supplement in June. We actually got that confirmed through Senate COVID committee in July, came back 1.1 million. So they were all getting that extra money, and unfortunately they all got a cut from the 25th of September. It's still flowing through. So they lost 55% because of the government decision to take it down. The issue we're very concerned about is that cut is due to that's meant to completely go on the 31st of December. And so Anti-Poverty this week has been really strongly, and it's not just this week, arguing that those payments cannot be reduced. In fact, we need a permanent increase, and we need to extend support to people who've been excluded, which are people on temporary visas.
Just very quickly, if that support goes, what is the impact?
Well, the payments will go back to that terrible number we've all been hearing for way too long, $40 a day. That's the base payment. And we know as well that the coronavirus supplement is actually helping people pay their rent, and in some cases mortgages for these newly unemployed people. But so you take away the supplement, there is a rent assistance payment government gives to people if they're renting in the private market, but it's very small, and it hasn't also been increased in real terms in 20 years. Yeah. So we're very fearful, and our partners this year are the Everybody's Home campaign, which is a huge range of organisations who are arguing that everyone deserves a secure and affordable home. We're very concerned to see what's going to happen, not just to hunger, that as Sarah said from their report, we haven't yet seen that peak of hunger. We haven't yet seen the peak impact of what's going to happen to people's houses, because yes, some people have been able to defer their rent or their mortgage. We haven't heard of very many reductions in rent. That's at the top end, not at the lower end. And in fact, affordability, our partners Anglicare Australia have also done the work on that, and it showed that affordability at the bottom's actually gone down because people are trading down because they've lost their jobs. So they're actually going down. So the cost of renting at that lower level hasn't come off. So we are very concerned about if those payments are not extended or a permanent increase, of what we might be seeing really in 21, especially the government itself says unemployment is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that's the terrible thing we're at now, recognising it will get worse. And just to shine a light, I suppose, on through another lens on multiculturalism, ethnic communities, Mohammed, how is that impacting for you?
Yeah, look, I think with everything that the previous panelists have said, I don't need to kind of go over it because those challenges still remain for culturally and linguistically diverse Australians, multicultural communities here. And I guess what we need to recognise is that there is another layer of, language barriers to accessing services, to accessing correct information. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we know, there's been just a tsunami of disinformation trying to kind of communicate to CALD communities. And we've seen some of that has been stuffed up pretty badly and embarrassingly. And I guess this kind of shows that, we haven't really invested in multicultural communities to build the capacity in kind of dealing with these issues. And we're happy to kind of go out there and ask multicultural communities to step in and do voluntary work and, inform their communities. Of course, they will do that, but that is not sustainable in the long run. And I think we need to really stop and take a good look at what has been in place and previously to say, well, this model needs to change. This model of you coming to us and relying on communities to do the bulk of the lifting here doesn't work. And you can't go out there in the media and kind of rattle statistics to say, we've had 8,000 engagements with multicultural communities. Well, that's not, if you did, we wouldn't have had the problems that we had. So those are some of the tokenistic issues that we've been facing and we've been trying to kind of, fix for a very long time. And I think it took a pandemic to try and get people to at least recognize that these issues are actually real and they have devastating impacts. The other issue is, I guess, it's concerning, and I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I think multicultural communities and CALD Australians, if you like, aren't particularly seen as vulnerable communities. Depending on which department you ask but I guess when it comes to the health response, I don't think there is an agreed sense that CALD communities are particularly vulnerable when it comes to access to health and some of those health services. And I think that's really concerning because that tells me that they don't really understand the challenges on the ground. And we have even a bigger problem to trying to convince them. And then, decades later, we need to kind of educate them on how to engage properly when it comes to policy design and program rollout. The other problem is that we don't actually have data on ethnicity, culture, and language. I mean, the best data that we have is the census data, and that's based on the postcodes. Now, when you go to get a COVID test, no one asks you, you know, the coldness, if you like. But for example, if you go, you will, if you're an Aboriginal Torres Islander, there is an indicator, and that data is so critical because we know who is getting tested, but we also know who is not coming forward to get tested where, so we can kind of roll some of those things out. We've had some really good engagements, and the department is keen to see how we can fix that. But also, what's really exciting for us, and you know, I think it's timely. So FECA just recently published, actually a couple of days ago, we just published an issues paper called "If we don't count it, it doesn't count." So it's a cold data issues paper, which kind of explores the issue of not having cold data and the impacts of it on mainly health aspects. But I guess it kind of lays what the issues are and what we need to do with a bit of roadmap on how to address those issues. I'm happy to post the link to that issues paper here. And
that would be fantastic if you could. And thank you so much. And it does bring us back to the absolute importance of having data and how to use data, which Scott, you might want to show us and give us some more illustration on how data can assist us in this extremely difficult situation we all find ourselves in.
Yeah, look, I think what I want to really point out here is that, you know, the team has done an epic amount of work to understand the complexities of this, and there's still a lot of work to do. But I guess the question for the sector is how will the demand be met when there are new cohorts presenting, when infrastructure isn't actually pointed in all the right directions anymore in terms of services and service delivery. And I think if we think about our model the way we've designed it, it's inherently designed to be applied and to work alongside social services, so that it is useful and it is continuously useful. And this really started with a conversation actually with Brenna Casey some months ago, when we realised, oh, hang on, I think we can solve for this. And what we've done is we take that base model of understanding of vulnerability, but applying it by amalgamating social services data or integrating social services data to deal with the specific and emergent gaps of supply and demand, and specifically trying to integrate data points, Mohammed, around things like cold data that is at least forecastable. There are people out there forecasting it. It's not accurate, but nonetheless, that's a start. To start integrating those data sets and understanding the community's risk. It's interesting, actually, to that point, when we looked at the top 30 communities that suffered all 4 pressure points at once. Actually, I asked one of our partners at Reg from Culture, I've forgotten the name of his company now, Cultural Pulse. I asked him, you know, what did he think there was in terms of cold communities in those top 30? And he said, to be honest with you, there's a spread between some of those communities have 0% of cold people in them, and some of them have 75%. So the truth of it is we need to get underneath the next layer of data to really understand what's happening. The types of vulnerabilities in the communities that are most impacted will require these models to have that specific application for each expression or symptom of vulnerability to better be serviced effectively. I mean, and to address the gap really between supply and demand. That's the driver of this model from the outset, is to ensure that we're sort of meeting demand where it is, when and where it is, and that we're actually informed as to the priorities for immediate action. I think that's the most important thing too. When there's a lot of work to do, we need to know which work needs to be done first. And our work really has been just an exercise in collaborative data utility. And we believe that serving and supporting vulnerable communities will require the same coming together for the benefit of those in need by the community at large around the social services sector. So with that, I just wanted to close out my part of today and wrap up a little bit. And I want to really thank the team, the incredible hard work of Carl Joseph and Nick Nicholas, Richard Sellers, Hubert Lau, Winnie Chang, along with the rest of our partner crew in making this model end of the day possible. It's been an epic amount of work. I recall a phone call with Tony Wren that went something like, when? What? Anyway, the last month has been interesting, but here we are. I'd also like to thank Mark Civitella, who I've known for a very long time, for hosting, and our panelists for not only just attending, but also bringing enthusiasm to this topic, and for the work that you do with vulnerable communities and their families. And last, but certainly not least, Tony Wren, I just want to give you an extra plug from Anti-Poverty Week for your support and enthusiasm around this work. It's been amazing. So thank you. We're not from this sector, and by God, have you launched us hard. So we really appreciate it, and thank you for that support. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Scott. It is humbling, you know, to participate in something like this and realise that the energy, the wisdom, the enthusiasm, the commitment of so many people is sort of holding an entire sort of national infrastructure together. And it's often the things that aren't counted or seen. So today has been a wonderful illumination, and it just highlights how important these discussions are, these processes are, and how important it is that that organisations like the Art of More are coming in and using skills and data and analytics and insights to actually try and get the most out of this sector. But thank you very much for that. But look, we do have some questions from participants. If you'll allow me to ask them. We have one for Food Bank. And what is the biggest constraint to Food Bank to provide food relief to the vulnerable? Is it volume of food or supply chain? Sarah?
I think it's a combination of both. Certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, supply chain was a big issue for us because we saw a disruption of the normal food supply chains. The mere fact that we saw food service close due to the lockdowns, etc., meant that there was a reduction in food rescue. We also saw a lot of panic buying, which left empty shelves and the supermarkets demanding quick replenishment by the manufacturers, which meant that there was less food for us. The supermarkets dropped their some of their standards, quality standards, and time standards, in order to get those shelves refilled, and that meant we lost out. So that was a big issue, certainly early in COVID. But the capacity to get the food out has been a big issue too, because again, we saw a lot of charities actually close themselves at the beginning of COVID. Many charities are manned by older people who needed to self-isolate, rightly so, but that was a challenge because those charities were unable to cope or deal with the COVID-safe requirements and therefore chose to close themselves. So we've had to do a lot of quick manoeuvring in order to be able to create new channels to get food out to people, and all credit to all the state and territory food banks, because they've really answered the call and been very innovative during this time.
Yeah, I think this might be a question for you, Stella, is how can we overcome the shame and doubt with new cohorts of people finding themselves in this position for the first time?
Well, I mean, firstly, what we say to everyone is this is not of your making. We all find ourselves in every sector sharing the one customer at the moment. For our part at Good Shepherd, we're really sort of focused on three levers and themes: people's confidence, their ability to be able to access support, know where to go, and be confident about receiving a service and knowing what questions to ask and understanding what their rights and responsibilities are. People's competence, really understanding what's in those, fast credit, Afterpay, small fine print, a whole range of other things in terms of their financial literacy and capability and access. And the third one is, I guess, people's connection, because they're also presenting, apart from the financial stress, with a whole range of social vulnerabilities. how are they connected to their local community? How are they connected to their own family? And what are the levers for us? As a sector, COVID is presenting a whole new way of working, both in terms of the service channels that we have to look at differently, but also the service design to meet what is a very, as you say, very different cohort.
Yeah. Tony, do you have anything to add to that? Given, I suppose, we are in Anti-Poverty Week, this is just probably, in my living memory, the most difficult time. I can't recall a more difficult time. I know I'm young, but I throw it out there. Any comments on that, Tony? How are you finding it? I think you're on. Your mic's off. Sorry.
I think that's the most common phrase of the whole of the pandemic. You're still muted.
You're on mute.
But hopefully, I do want to have that message of hope, and that what I saw coming out, and yes, we saw some bad behaviour with the food purchasing, but we also saw some incredibly great behaviour, and I think that it was the bushfires as well. We really did come together. I was actually caught up in the bushfires myself on the south coast of New South Wales and had to be evacuated. And we're in a fortunate situation, but we were very close to where there was a lot of really terrible stuff happening, and people did really. We were in a emergency evacuation centre, and people were really looking out for each other, and that was great to see. And also the community services swinging into action well before the government did. So I can't let go of those bushfires. They're really stuck in my psyche. But I do want to also hold on to this evidence, and again, we want governments to really focus on the science and the evidence, and the science in fighting the pandemic and doing the right thing with COVID. We've also need the science here, and we've always needed it in this sector. So yeah, I just a plea for that. So again, let's just look at the evidence, what works. We know giving people payments, enough payments, is actually lifting people from poverty and protecting people from poverty. So we need to make sure that that's exactly what happens, because we can't just hope that things are getting better. We do need to look at the evidence. So, and just a final plug, I wanted to say thanks very much to Scott, because I did put quite a lot of stress on him, because at the same time we were working on this, I was also talking to the 7:30 report to get a story up this week on unemployment. And so the two beautifully came together in that Scott did do the data, you guys all did the data to see what's happened. And so we can see that, yes, it's affected a lot of communities, because, and communities where there's been that particular reliance on, say, tourism, but also we've seen that a lot of more middle income communities are getting the payments because the government changed a lot of things, not just the payment rate, but also letting partners get more. And those changes are all going to stop at the end of this year as well, unless something happens. Anyway, just a plug, hopefully we're both on the 7:30 report tonight. We've done our filming, and there's a lot of other news around, but if you get a chance, there'll be more about this.
We have one more question, which I will throw, we've both been asked, which I will throw to Scott, who can answer this very quickly. But of course, he's joined us in between media engagements, so we're very grateful to have him. Does the model show a difference between city and country, Scott?
Most definitely. The thing about regional areas in our investigations are, occur on a number of levels. So regional areas are more likely to be reliant on a single industry, for instance. They're equally more likely to show a higher incidence of requiring health support. So there's a couple of layers of vulnerability that are more prevalent in rural and regional Australia. So we most definitely, certainly the model is built and wired to get down to very specific geographic areas, but those differences are quite stark on a couple of metrics.
Thank you, Scott. And That really wraps it up. Thanks very much. All this information is available at The Art of More, I assume, Scott. And there's also,
Yes.
we've seen in the chat.
.com.au.
Yep, .com.au. And we've seen in the chat some people have posted some links to vital resources and information which are being shared. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me along, Scott. This is always humbling just to see the work that's going on. And of course, in the great tradition of these things, we are over time, and I thank you.